Walsh would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Certainly. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Okay. School Committee Chair Report. I'm not sure, I hope I'm not stealing anyone's thunder here, but I wanted to read an email that I received from Superintendent Ravenel regarding the Red Raiders and their coaches. Proud to share this email with you. This is from the superintendent. CMADA President Kara Ellis informing us that Fitchburg High School has been selected as the Sportsmanship Award winner for District E. That's 72 schools in Central Mass for the 2016-27 school year. Quite an accomplishment.
Very nice.
Nicely done. Nicely done. That's it for my chair report. Resource Committee. Who chairs the Resource Committee? I've got my paperwork. What happened to it?
Both, the next two.
He should be here shortly.
I don't think there's anything to
Oh,
report.
okay.
Just
I don't think
meeting
there was
next
anything to
Yeah.
report, right, okay. Policy Committee, we have to wait on that as well, I think. Resource Committee. That was Stevens, I'm sorry. School building needs.
Same thing.
Pete
Same
Stevens
thing.
again.
I don't think there's anything,
Here's the man of the
Oh,
hour.
here
here's
he
the
is.
man of the hour.
You're too late, Pete, forget it. Okay.
I can go home?
You- Your Resource Committee Chair Report, Mr. Stevens.
There will be no meeting till next week.
Thank you. School building needs as well.
Same thing, yes.
Same thing, next week, got it, okay. Okay, we got to that. Student Support Committee, Ms. LaBelle Pierce.
We met on October 19th. We covered a few topics. We wanted to get a class count, what our classroom size is looking like this year, and looking to kind of follow up particularly with the younger grades and maybe anything we can do to try to help that situation. That's definitely the bigger class sizes in the elementary school. We have questions about para coverage and special education, and we're going to be following up with that on our November 16th meeting. We'll be tentatively meeting November 16th at 3:30. We also are going to be following up with just kind of a final report about drug education programs at the schools. And I think that's really the crux of what we covered. Thanks.
Thank you. Any comments from the members of the committee? Seeing none. School Personnel Committee and Executive Committee, I have really nothing to report as the chair, unless members, Mr. Stevens or Ms. Walsh, have anything to add?
No.
Seeing none. And you mentioned building needs, all right. So no need for Executive Committee and the student report.
So on October 12th, there was a MIFA night to help students and parents through like the financial aid process, going to college and everything. On October 14th, there was an AP English Saturday session. I wasn't able to go, but there was a decent turnout, so those are also really helpful for students. There was a health fair on October 19th. I'm pretty sure there was 30 tables there, and it was really cool to see. And the grades closed the last Friday, November 3rd.
So additionally, MCAS makeups are this week for people that have either failed or missed the test or transfers. We have a couple students that have moved here from Puerto Rico that are taking the test this week. And speaking of which, along with the Penny Wars that our school had throughout the month of October, we also, through the Current Events Club, which is a community service-based club, We duct taped Mr. Roach to the wall during lunch. So everyone paid for duct tape and stuck him to the wall for 2 hours. And so that raised over $750 to the Red Cross for relief for Puerto Rico, Houston, and Florida.
You took pictures, right?
Oh, yeah.
I want to see some of those pictures. Where are they?
Posted them on Facebook.
Did you? Oh, okay. Oh, good, good,
Yeah.
good, okay.
The
And
uses for duct tape just keep going on and on, right?
And then the Current Events Club is now, they just finished hosting a clothing drive for homeless teenagers in Massachusetts. So they're all being dropped off in Lynn tomorrow. So every month, the Current Events Club focuses on a community service project and helps communities in need throughout Massachusetts. And the last thing is this Thursday, we have our class touch football. So the senior boys will face the faculty, and the freshmen will face the sophomores, and the juniors will face the seniors. So that's always a fun fall event. And then we have our Thanksgiving pep rally. So everyone's getting ready for that, the wall contest,
So
and it'll be Thanksgiving.
we've got one game left, right, home game, Algonquin this weekend, right? This Friday. And that's it until Thanksgiving, correct? And Thanksgiving is at Crocker Field. Turkey Day games at
Nice.
Crocker Field, so home court advantage. Love it.
Breakfast for the bands at Lemonster.
Oh,
this
that's
year.
right. Yep,
And what's the date on that, Jean?
The Sunday before Thanksgiving, is that the
right.
19th?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Sound
Yep,
right?
good.
$8.
$5 for children, and
Yeah.
then under a certain age, I think it's free.
Right, and it goes like 7 to noon.
7 to 12. I think they open the door for food at 8 to 12, pretty sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Pete.
You mentioned two students from Puerto Rico and taking the MCAS test? So they moved in
As a result of the storm, you mean here?
And-
okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
They have to take the test.
and they have to take the test.
Do we
Okay.
know how many students?
21, I think we're up to.
We're up to 21?
We're up to 21.
Not all at the high school.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I
District-wide?
think 5 at the high school and 16 at the elementary and middle.
Thank you.
But there are no exemptions or waivers
Right.
for any students.
Well, and right now, I just met with the associate commissioner today on some other stuff at a meeting, and they were talking about a second wave, because if any of you watch 60 Minutes on Sunday night, the forecast is not good. It's
Right.
Christmas, January for 50% of the island, and maybe February for the rest. So the expectation is that there might be a lot more families that it's just not gonna be sustainable to stay there. So They
Well,
are
sent-
looking, we have written, we wrote a letter, group of superintendents asking to extend the October 1st report. So today we did hear from the commissioner, Associate Commissioner Wolfson, that they're gathering all of the data, where they've created a mechanism for us to submit, the data, with the idea that at some point there might be an additional appropriation to supplement the districts that have been impacted by the students coming from Puerto Rico.
Can I ask?
One,
Go ahead.
Where are the families staying? Do we,
A lot of them are doubling up. It really depends. They're staying with relatives if they can rent, Not everyone coming is, has no funds or no,
Right,
that,
right.
so if they can, they're trying to rent something or find a place to stay, if not, staying with relatives.
Yeah, and we have a couple of families who are ministers in their own churches. And I was talking to one, and they have 2 families with 6 children staying at their home indefinitely.
I met with the executive director of Los Centros. He's the state-designated agency to act as the repository for those families coming in. That organization is downtown Fitchburg, and they're working with the families as they come in and placing them with host families.
Yeah.
But again, the state has identified and that organization as the one
Okay.
for Central Miss. So it's Leominster. I believe they're going as far as Gardner as well. So they're responsible for that, coordinating that. So, Juan Gomez is the executive director.
One, Andre mentioned the October 1st. The delegates at the MASC conference last week, we voted to extend, now what we're doing to get a bill passed, voting to extend the October 1st rule, change it to January 31st.
Yeah.
And if that,
Yeah.
if that can pass, we'd catch all those kids that leave
Yeah,
school after October 1st.
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I
Jean?
just wanted to ask a different question. So your first quarter of your senior year is over. How are you doing? Do you feel like it's going fast? Are you all geared up, ready for college and?
Yeah. It goes by pretty fast. There's a lot of things going on. Especially, I think it'll pick up a lot more second semester. But first quarter did go by pretty fast.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a relief, but I mean, we'll miss it when we're gone. So it's good.
Great. Ms. Cragen, the policy committee, is there anything to report on that?
We are going to schedule a meeting, hopefully before the holidays, but nothing since our last meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, ladies. Have a good one.
Next on the agenda, approval of the minutes from the previous school committee meeting, approval of the minutes of the regular school committee meeting of October 2nd, 2017.
Motion?
Motion made, seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, that is unanimous. No need for executive session. Communications. Public comment, it's a 5-minute limit. Is anyone, oh, yes.
Sorry, I had my hand up for
That's right,
communications.
Yeah.
So, I think last night I met a Fishburne High School graduate. Her name's Tara Sweeney. She's class of '96. And she is in training to be an astronaut, an actual astronaut. So she was a guest of Mr. Stevens, and she spoke at the Boys and Girls Club today to lots of Fitchburg kids, and we're looking to have her speak in our schools as well. She's very inspiring. I sent out a lot of emails last night to let people know, to let our listeners know that this amazing graduate who's in the Athletics Hall of Fame, but who's also a very serious scientist, and who has logged something like 6 hours in zero gravity, is available to speak. So she also has information about the space camp in Huntsville, Alabama. So she's here this week. She has an open schedule, so just putting it out there. She would love to speak to any classes, any grades, and she has already been at Boys and Girls Club, and she will return in February, which is very exciting too.
She no longer has an open schedule.
Andre's already
Yeah,
filled it.
I think she's got 5 bookings
Yeah.
in schools already, and I got an email around 4:30 from Rheingold saying, when is she available? So I called her and talked to her on the phone. She's booking up very quickly.
Glad to hear it.
She's a graduate of the Air Force Academy.
Yes, she is.
That's also very impressive. And just a note, her father and I both went to boot camp and enlisted in the Navy together. Fel Sweeney. Yeah, he's a little older than I
Now
am.
that I didn't know.
Yeah, we both at boot camp together.
I
Yeah,
have one comment.
sure. Yeah.
I just want to thank Deb Mulcahy Jeffries for her
Oh, yeah,
magnificent.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
Always.
it was the 30th
Yes.
anniversary of Project Peace. What a lot of hard work went into that. It was really impressive, and all the kids voting. It was just an amazing event today. So I want to commend her. She does a great job.
Anyone seeking public comment? Not seeing anyone. Moving on. Superintendent's report.
Okay, just a couple quick announcements before. One was yesterday, the Hall of Fame dinner. What a fantastic event. For me, who's new to the district, to hear the stories, just to see photos of Pete Stevens, you know, when he was 19, 18 or so. It was just really impressive.
I kept looking at the picture, Audrey. I'm going, is that Pete?
We don't know. I don't know. It could be
Yeah,
fake news.
I don't know.
But he said that was his picture, but, I mean, so Photoshop, but just such an incredible.
It was a little
you read
darker,
the
wasn't it? I mean, in that picture.
Write-ups on that, and the dinner itself, there must have been 250 people there.
360.
360.
360, the largest ever.
But just
Nice.
really, great event.
Yeah.
Great
Yeah.
event.
Yeah.
Then also, Jeremy Roach and one of our teachers, Judy Jollimore, ran in the New York Marathon yesterday. I'm a little disappointed in Jeremy. Shalane Flanagan from Marblehead, won the race for the women. I'm going to talk to him about that. I think he might have been slacking off. But, the fact that he does this just astounds me with what he does all week. Goes to New York, runs a marathon, and then I'm surprised he's not here tonight, when the students are being recognized, and he may still show up. But just great stuff. Also, the MASC conference, it was great to have Pete and Sally there. We were represented in 4 workshops over the 3 days.
Nice.
On relationships between charter schools and public schools, our MAPLE project that we're involved in on personalized learning, one on the work of mindfulness, and we had staff there from Rheingold talking about the Inner Explorer and the exercises in mindfulness that are having a big impact on the quality of the school. And last but not least, and it really was last, at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, was our pet therapy with some of our staff members, Sally, Cragen, Mr. Waffles. I don't remember the name of all the other animals, but it was really quite the menagerie. Great turnout. I think we had 30 people maybe in the room.
Yeah.
And some superintendents, 2 superintendents have already emailed me. One is trying to set up a site visit for one of their elementary schools, so I think Fitchburg was really well represented.
That's excellent.
Also, Paisha is here. Paisha, I'd like to call you up. As you know, Paisha has been our PR person for the last how many months? How long have you been doing this?
June.
Since June. And she's done an incredible job. And every time I open up the paper or Facebook or whatever, there's another story about the Fitchburg Public Schools. Unfortunately, someone else got her. She was offered a great opportunity. So she is going to be moving on. It's what we do, right? We work with people, we train them, and then they leave us. But she has just done an incredible job. I can't even begin to say, taking photos, being at events, writing up really great press releases that basically are printed word for word. That she's, so unfortunately, I've already posted the job, Paisha. We love you, but you're moving on. I think you're here till, when did you say?
The 17th.
The 17th, so she'll be with us till the 17th. But I personally wanted to thank you for your work. It really is above and beyond. You moved into the schools, people trust you, they work with you, and your work has been exceptional. But I think we want to recognize that. So you're gonna have to write up your own press release about.
Can't we hold her a contract for like 90 days?
Yeah, I tried that, that's not gonna work. And then lastly, a communication is tomorrow, there is an incredible professional development day happening in the district. It's a day off, kids at home, don't come to school tomorrow, there is no school. It's a
Unless you're helping.
It's right, unless you're one of the helpers, but it's a professional development day. Lots of people have been involved in this, but as you can well imagine, Paula took a strong lead in this, so I told her I'd give her just a few minutes to talk about tomorrow's PD day.
So, thank you, Superintendent. Everyone has a folder. I know I've sent emails, and even now, there are a couple of room changes. But the introduction for our keynote speakers in your folder, about 11 years ago, a few of us attended a weekend workshop at Boston College, and it was the emerging world of immersive technologies, virtual reality, augmented reality, immersive systems, gamification of learning. And I've been watching the director, the founding director, Aaron Walsh, and his organization has grown. No longer the annual workshops are at BC, they're all over the globe. One year it was Sydney, Australia. One year it was Madrid. They've been in Paris twice, and at the end of November, their annual symposium, they call it a summit, will be in Italy. So when we were talking about planning our own professional development day last spring, I contacted Skype, the world of digital, the digital environment is great. And I said, you may not remember me, but we've been following you for about a decade. You have some time? And he said yes. So he's going to be our keynote speaker. He's coming to conduct workshops. We have a whole program of workshops with about 22 staff members from Fitchburg. It's a for us, by us, teachers leading workshops for their colleagues in an ed camp kind of way. But Aaron Walsh will be our keynote and then his 3 workshop sessions. So if we've invited a few folks at least to come listen to the keynote, but the day will be open. And then the other exciting thing is, and I'm not joking when I say the future lives here in Fitchburg now. We have some really dynamic, engaging, cutting-edge technologies that our students are engaged with every day. 3D printing, the Google Expeditions, this virtual augmented reality sandbox, that's a topographical sandbox, that's extraordinary. The augmented reality applications our students are working with, because our goal is to move students from experiences as consumers of this technology to actually curating, understanding with judgment what this technology can do for them, and then moving into the creation. And we put together a 4-minute video to start tomorrow, but it couldn't be more timely. The little 10-year-old girl who threw out the first pitch in the 4th World Series game had a prosthetic hand that was made on a 3D printer. That's the world, the future that our students need to grow into and be successful in. So this is the first effort to move the district. And just as a point, for example, all the evaluations, the exit tickets, the end of the day evaluation, and the survey that it's part of our tech plan development, paperless. It's all going to be online. That's a first for us. We'll distribute the URL tomorrow at about 10 o'clock. So this is a big change, big shift, but I think we're calling it a student showcase sandbox, and there's some exciting work being done in the district.
Andre mentioned, the programs that we put on. I was just so impressed with Principal Adam Renda this morning. We run the responsive classroom, and to see that 400 kids in that auditorium.
Closer to 600.
600? I can't count as high anymore. And it was just very impressive, the control there was no yelling, no quiet down. It was just boom, they were all quiet. Very impressed with what Adam's doing up there.
Okay, thank you. Well, we get an opportunity to recognize 2 of our students, Brianne Harnden, I can never pronounce it, Harnden, and Judith Hansen. If you'll come up, we want to recognize you for your honor as Fitchburg High School National Merit Scholars, and come up and talk a little bit about what is a National Merit Scholar and how do you feel about having been chosen. So come up to the front here.
Very nice.
Different view.
So the National Merit Scholar, I was a commemorated National Merit Scholar. I don't know about you, but it means I was in the top 50,000 scores in America last year for my PSATs done in October on the school-wide testing day.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Well, so if we had lived in any other state, we would have been semifinalists, but because Massachusetts is so strong in education, They base it on like, there's like an index for your score. And they basically take like the top scorers in every state and they move on to be the semifinalists. And then essentially everyone who's a semifinalist becomes a finalist as long as they complete the application. And the finalists are the ones who apply for specific scholarships. But being in Massachusetts, it's a lot more competitive, like the score index. So we are commended scholars, which just means we're in the top 50,000 total in the country. So that was pretty cool to see. We got like a little certificate. So
That was great, that's Very nice.
You know, 50,000 just may seem like a lot to you, but, you know, I would have been lucky to be in the top 50 million. So it's really nothing to, but you're right, you know, we're in a very competitive state. So when you think about who you were competing with, you know, in this state, it's really quite an honor. And, you know, I know that this is a personal success for you and proud parents over there, Mr. and Mrs. Hanson, you know, great to have you here and the support, the partnership that you have with us. But your success is also something that the whole school district benefits from. So it's really important for us that when we hear that the kind of work and effort that students have put in has moved them to a place like that that's nationally recognized, we want to recognize that too. So thank you and congratulations.
Nice.
Right. Maybe a question, Mr. Hanson, is it your grandmother or your is it her great-grandmother?
Yeah, 3-generation Leah graduating from Fitchburg High.
Wow.
My mom, she's 95.
Yeah.
She's always the oldest lady at
At
the
the alumni.
Alumni night.
Yeah.
The rose.
She gets her rose every year for,
She still rules the family.
yeah.
As it should be.
And her grandfather
Wow.
was the first head building custodian for Memorial Middle School right here.
That's incredible.
Herbie Hanson.
You know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the level of tradition is really impressive. So thank you for sticking with us and continuing to, you know, do well in representing the Fitchburg Public Schools. Thanks so much.
Oh, my gosh. Custodian when I talk.
We have a field trip. Fred, who is one of our new assistant principals, he may not even look familiar. I'm not sure he's ever come before school committee before. He was terrified. I told him you'd be nice to him tonight. But he's going to talk a little bit about this field trip. This is the third year that we go on the field trip. Jonathan did it for 2 years, and now Fred's taking over.
It's
So
officially an
welcome.
annual trip now.
It's officially an annual trip. Good. That's what we like to hear. So tell us a little bit about this trip.
Sure. I'm very excited to be able to speak on behalf of the McKay Arts Academy to again propose our 6th grade trip to the White Mountains in New Hampshire and the AMC Mountain Classroom Program. Though we're still working on finalizing the date, we anticipate that the students will be taking the 3-day trip during the last couple weeks of May. For this, we want to be sure that it does not occur during the proposed dates for MCAS testing. The trip will be paid for through fundraising starting the week of December 18th. Students will be selling chocolate bars. That is strategically done on purpose to happen right before vacation. Hopefully they'll be able to take some home and sell them. Additionally, the 6th grade team will be providing parents with a payment plan in which they can pay into incrementally throughout the year, so they don't have to pay it all at once. The Mountain Classroom Program provides students with a challenging hands-on experience where they learn about themselves and about the natural world. Activities are oriented towards increasing a student's environmental knowledge by exploring the regional ecosystem in New Hampshire's White Mountains, hear group and individual challenges, help participants increase self-reliance and self-esteem while fostering cooperation and learning about leadership and responsibility. These skills can be transferred back to the classroom and back to the students' daily lives. Perhaps the greatest benefit is that students will be able to develop a long-lasting understanding and respect for natural ecosystems that will help them make well-rounded decisions in the future on issues which impact their environment. There are many academic standards which are covered during this trip. Some include learning to recognize, interpret, and being able to create models of the Earth's common physical features, learning to describe and give examples of ways in which the Earth's surface is built up and torn down by natural processes, including the deposition of sediments, rock formation, erosion, and weathering. Learning to explain and give examples of how physical evidence such as fossils and surface features of glaciation supports theories that the Earth has evolved geologically over time. And also learning ways in which genetic variation, environmental factors are causes of evolution and the diversity of organisms. And that's the sum of our trip.
Questions? Any chaperones?
We'll have chaperones.
There's a checkbox here of notification of school nurse, so that's, okay.
Yep, as soon as we have a roster of
All
all
right.
of the students which are
See
going
if there's anybody who needs
Exactly.
that kind of service. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. Good.
Looks good.
No questions?
No
That was easy.
No, I think they're going easy on you, you know? I'd go now.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, interesting, talking about, this is a field trip. I talked to 2 superintendents over the 3 days who have done away with the Washington's field trip in their districts.
Really?
That's a very common, I guess that's a common thing that's happening right now. People are doing away with that Washington field trip, so I said, well, I'm really glad to say that we still do it, and I think it's an important.
Why, yeah, why?
Finances and concerns of safety.
Safety.
You know, and we had a conversation about that. You know, I remember when, after 9/11, the school committee where I was working, there were people who wanted to end, you know, field trips abroad. And the question I asked was, okay, if you end the field trips because it's unsafe, when do you start them up again? What would be the event that would say, okay, it's all safe now to go, you know, rather than, you know, we really need to look at these things one step at a time. But I thought, what a loss that groups of 8th graders are not getting that experience to go to Washington and experience all of that. So I'm glad to see that we're still doing it.
I think a lot of smaller districts also can't get a nurse to be able to accompany if you have students who need that. So that, this district's got, you know, definitely a size benefit to it.
Yeah,
And it's
definitely.
always
Yeah.
been well attended.
So school improvement plans. Craig, we've got 2 school improvement plans. We're gonna go through all of them over the next 3 meetings. And Craig is gonna tell you about where they are at Lonjo right now. And the slides are in your packet.
So good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to talk a little bit about this year's school improvement plan and maybe start by going backwards, looking at some of our data from last year's MCAS, some of the other data points that we've been collecting over time. Every week and pretty much every day, we spend a lot of time looking at our attendance data. This is just a historical perspective. Last year, we're at almost 93%, with about a 20% chronic absentee rate, which is still high. We tend to fluctuate, and it's actually fairly standard throughout the district and throughout the state. Anywhere from that 16 mark in 2016 to that high mark of 22. That seems to be a fairly common trend. My teachers this year, many of them are posting their daily attendance on their door. We continue to track it. We continue to encourage students to be there and remind them daily of the importance of being in school and on time each and every day. So that's something that we continue to look at. You know, I always like to highlight that we average probably about 120 students per school year that don't start with us on the first day of school, that are with us on the last day of school, and yet what's usually a plus or minus of 3 or 4 students. So there's this considerable churn rate of students who are coming to us from all over the state, actually from all over the country. So we do, and this year is no different. We've started with quite a few new faces. But it's always nice to have new students coming to us and bringing in a different perspective.
Craig, what, that 20%, what does that equate to, actual people, numbers?
So 10% chronic, it's 10% of your school year. So basically 18 days of absence or more.
How many kids?
What's your enrollment?
Yeah,
585 as of today,
20% of that.
20% of that. And we track, and now we're tracking, you know, and I'll speak to PBIS a little bit in a minute, we're actually tracking it day to day. You know, the weather, believe it or not, has a considerable impact. Tuesdays seem to be our high day, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I don't know why. But it's interesting to see some of the trends that we've seen over the last couple of months of looking at our daily attendance data. Our goal is 95% or higher every day. Today we had 37 absences, and if we keep it right around that 25 student mark, that will help us reach our goal. I am glad to see that we've hit 96% more so this year than we have in our tenure at Longjo. So I think that the word and the importance of being in school every day is getting out there, and we will continue to encourage. And that is a pretty select group of students. You know, when you see that your average daily attendance is, you know, 93, 94, 95%, and yet you still have a 20% of the student population being chronically absent. It's just that somebody's absent every day. It's just not always the same group of kids. I thought at the beginning when I first looked at that, I said, how can we actually be 95% and still have 20% of our kids chronically absent? And that's
Your enrollment from 2012, when you had 93.8, you've gone up probably a couple hundred students.
We have.
Since then.
Yep.
So I mean.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just have a question on that. Of the chronic absences, how many of them are what you'd ultimately label like excused because there are just some issues that are
Yeah,
going on?
We're just going much through some of that today for our most current data, and, you know, I think there were 80 or so students that we were looking at, the top 25 or 30 that we could document, you know, appendicitis and some considerable medical issues that were going on, some hospitalizations for mental health and some other areas. So it's not all just missing school. For a good chunk of them, it is. It's, you know, I take a Monday or a Friday off every week, and we continue to work with families as closely as we can. In some instances, we'll work with the local courts. The courts have really kind of communicated to us that they don't want to deal with that issue much. So we've had some diversion boards that we hold right at our school. So we invite probation and we invite DCF and other agencies in the area to meet with families to try to get kids back on track. As you all know, we've been looking at our suspension data, and last year, on average, we were able to reduce our suspensions across the board by about 30%. Part of the work that we're doing with the department and other school districts throughout the state is really looking at alternatives, rethinking discipline, and what other types of things can you come up for that doesn't keep kids out of school. So we're trying to keep kids in school as best we can, and still trying to deal with some of the behaviors that we're seeing on a regular basis.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
So a student is in ISS. What does his or her day look like when he or she is in ISS? What does that look like?
It's tutoring, so they're able to get their work. If they need to go to a class to take a test, they're able to do that. We can coordinate that with teachers. And again, it depends on what the offense is. If there was a real disruptive influence in a class, then we're not going to put them back necessarily in that class.
Okay. And the tutoring is being administered by an educator, a substitute,
my in-house tutor has been with us. She's not an educator by trade. But does an awful lot of tutoring, counseling. I mean, she does a lot. She works. Most of the kids who are in my in-house room on a daily basis are not there necessarily because they're in trouble. They might be there taking a break. They might be there doing some other work. So we've really kind of evolved that room into looking at the model and coming up with some better strategies.
Okay, so someone can admit to an ISS.
That's our goal. Our goal is that we can get our kids to self-regulate, that when they need to take a break, that they can take a break. In many cases, we have individual plans for them that we've devised. So, yeah, and it's been very successful for many kids.
Okay. And then is there a time limit? So I want to go into ISS for a block, for an hour, or all day?
Yeah, in most cases, 10 or 15-minute break is what we work with. There are other times where a student may stay in there for a longer period of time. Maybe they've been out for a couple of days. They need some time to get caught up. They're working closely with their classroom teachers to get that work sent to them so that they can actually do some of that work.
Okay.
If it makes sense not to be in that classroom.
Sure.
So, it's a changing landscape every
Sure,
day, and
yeah.
there's groups of kids that we work pretty closely with, and
Okay.
what works on Monday and Tuesday might not work on Wednesday and
Right.
Thursday.
Thank you.
Looking closer at our discipline data, which we're not that surprised with, but last year, 6% of our kids, or 35 individual students in our school accounted for 63% of all of our suspensions. So really looking at what interventions are necessary to keep those students on track and academically focused on their classwork. As you know, our PPI this year was really just based on our ability to test all of our subgroups. So I'm proud to say that we met in green, all of our subgroups tested at 95% or higher, which is not always easy to do when you have students who may be in an outside placement related to DYS or DCF. We still have the responsibility of tracking them down and making sure that they take this test within the window that we have available. In particular, when you get into some of our smaller subgroups that may only be 35 kids, you're talking if 3 of those students are out, you might miss the mark. And they hit into individual categories, so those same kids will count against you multiple times. And we found that to be the case, but last year we were able to track everybody down and get them to take the test.
Yeah.
I just threw up some quick data from this past year's MCAS. Again, this is MCAS 2.0. We don't have data to compare it to because we were doing Park for 2 years. We were hoping that this would be kind of our baseline data, but unfortunately, next year we'll be testing online. So we don't really have comparisons until a year after that. But our goal here, when we're looking at our subgroups, the CPI is something, our target is 75. And basically, you can score anywhere from 0 to 100, and you add all that up and you divide it by the number of students who actually took the test, and that's our goal. So you can see that and this is science and technology, which is only 5th and 8th grade. 6th and 7th graders don't take it. This is how we performed with our subgroups. Again, there are areas, obviously, that we want to get our kids out of the warning and the low needs improvement up into proficient and advanced. The other matrix that we do have this year with our math and ELA is growth percentiles, even though they're comparing the MCAS 2.0 to the Park. Our benchmark here, this is math, and this is all students. Our goal here is to be between 40 on the low side and 60 or higher. And obviously, we have some area to work. Math continues to be a focus for us, and we'll continue to work with our staff and doing a lot of professional development and working with our kids and providing them with interventions. And again, comparing multiple tests, it's sometimes, I think, difficult for us to really reflect and look back at, and what did MCAS look like compared to what Park looked like the previous year. In ELA, we performed higher. We were in that 40 to 60 range, and again, this is a median for all scores. Our 8th grade, and for many students, it's a 4-year journey. Our 8th graders their growth percentiles were in above 80, and in many categories across the board, we outperformed the state. So again, this is a median score that we're looking at here, which includes the highs and the lows. So again, our goal is to get those numbers between 40 and 60 or higher. And again, just moving forward, part of our focus from the end of last year, we started this year's school improvement planning, and the work that we were lucky enough now to be included into one of the department academies under the PBIS model. So this is our new mantra. We're respectful, engaged, prepared, and safe. This is the Longeau reps, as we call it now, and having a lot of discussions school-wide about what does respect look like, what does engagement, prepared, and safety look like school-wide. So our first goal, our major goal for this year is really building strong, positive relationships. And the work that we were able to, in the workshops that we were able to attend this past year in Nashville at the Model School Summit, really focused on relationship building and creating a very positive school climate. So these are our goals. That's our major goal, is building these strong relationships working with the PBIS group, I've got a representative group of 7 teachers now that will be meeting with a whole cohort of schools from across the state. I believe there's 10 or 12 schools that will be with us. We'll be meeting a total of, I believe, 10 or 12 days this school year for multi-day trainings with folks from, I believe, University of Connecticut. And we've already been through the first round. It's been very eye-opening for us to really peel back the layers of what PBIS is, what we thought it was, and what it really is.
Can you
So, we're
define
fortunate.
that just for people at home what
Yep,
PBIS is?
positive behavior interventions. So we're really looking at, and there's a slide that kind of helps us describe that. We're also working with a cohort of schools with Excel around social emotional learning, and really looking at our data. One of the pieces of the puzzle that we did implement, we have it fully implemented right now, is we moved to the whole second steps, which is a social curriculum. It's a tier 2 intervention to help kids engage with goal setting, with empathy, and with compassion. Very similar to what we've always done with Responsive Classroom, but this gives us a much more concrete curriculum to deliver under a very familiar Responsive Classroom format. So it's worked out very well. We're meeting with the staff, and we're continuing to provide professional development to them as we go on. Wanted to mention the Changemakers and Youth Ventures through the United Way, exciting initiatives that we have started. We've got multiple groups in the building right now that are looking at taking on projects within the school, within the community, and looking at how we can change things to make it better. And there is no limit to it, whether we're making our school better or making the world a better place. This is what the conversations that we've been having with them. So this really, I'm peeling back the layers of this positive behavior interventions and supports, focusing on the systems that we use, the data that we're collecting, and the practices. And I think this little logo here gives us some a really good glimpse of what we're doing. Not only are we looking at data, but we're looking at when it's happening. We're looking at time of the day. We're looking at days of the week. So we're looking through it from a very different lens.
Go ahead, you might answer.
And this is kind of that continuum, the pyramid that we're looking at. The greens are kids who are academically and social emotionally where they should be. The yellows are kids who are going to need some kind of supports, limited supports, but some supports. And then the red up at the top are those kids who need, those are those 35 kids that I talked about that need some serious intervention to get them back on track. And really looking at what we're doing now with the team is looking at what these interventions look like, how it is defined, how we communicate that, and how we have these conversations.
Okay, how are you gathering this data? Like how, as a school-wide or
Yep.
in classroom setting, are you gathering this data?
Yep, so there's a few data points that we use. We use discipline referrals, which is one.
Okay.
We use journaling as well, quite extensively in X2, which if I contact a parent or if I have a conversation with a student, it's basically just my handwritten notes into the computer. But we can run those reports of how many students are receiving journals. And in most cases, if somebody's getting a journal, somebody's had a conversation with them. So it gives us a nice data point to continue to track that. Attendance is a data point that we look at, and also feedback from guidance, because not all children will present in classrooms with poor behaviors. They might just be quiet. They may be, doing their work, but still anxious or depressed. And so we're working with guidance as that other data point as well.
So, I'm sorry, journaling is part of like the X1, is it like a report that as an administrator and educators
Yep.
putting in? and that's what
X2
you're
is our
calling it?
student management. So
X2,
everything
sorry.
goes into it, and my staff is very good about entering everything. If I call a parent, it goes in. If guidance calls a parent, or if a teacher emails a parent, it goes right
And
into
so
that.
everyone has access, so what one educator did will now be trackable?
That's the key.
Okay.
That's the key. So particularly for students who are really struggling, we find something that's working, we can make a note of it. Another teacher says, geez, that worked really well for me as well, so that
They
communication.
can
piece.
retrieve it without, okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And again, we will continue, this is a big piece that we've been working on for years. We will continue to look at this really coherent instructional model. This is where the academics take place. What are we doing with our teachers for professional development around an instructional model? Formative assessment is an area that we continue to delve into, which is an important piece about checking for understanding and getting kids to really talk and learn about what they're doing. This is a a pilot tool that we're using now through Mass Insight, which is a math initiative, but it's actually taking on a much bigger role, which is exciting. And it really does allow our teachers to look at how they're planning. It allows our students to look at how much they may understand a particular concept. And it gives us some really concrete information about where we think kids are. And it just gives you a nice visual where they're either a red, a yellow, or a green, and we can react to that through interventions. But my teachers are using it for planning, for assessing, reflecting, gathering evidence, and then grouping children in their classrooms, and we find it to be very useful. And then lastly, making things really relevant, that was a key component of the folks that we spent time with in Nashville. Our children in this data-driven world, in this technology-driven world, we gotta get things down to an area that interests them. I go back to an example of collecting stamps was one of the math activities that the kids had several years ago. I'm not quite sure how many kids actually collect stamps anymore. So the teacher made, his professional judgment and changed it into the used Air Jordans and how that product has changed over time and how much a sneaker may have been worth 10 years ago and what it's worth today. So we just made it relevant for the students in the class, and they just connected with it. So that's part of our goal. And it's in kind of getting as much technology into the classroom, whether it's virtual reality, whether it's part of this gaming, going towards Edgenuity, which is a little bit more blended learning, using Khan Academy, using AR. So these are all kind of tools that we use on an ongoing basis that we're continuing to refine. So that's it in a snapshot.
Using Edgenuity?
We are just starting to roll that out on a very limited, in fact, when you mention in-house, it's a tool that we want to use with our in-house tutor, and that way students who frequent there can log right into their math lessons, their ELA lessons, their science lessons, and it can be used as another tool for some independent learning. Kids could access it from home if they wanted to.
How are those 35 students, are they spread out over the 4 classes pretty much, or?
They tend to be, it's different every year.
Yeah.
Last year it was heavy 5th and 6th grade. And again, this 4-year journey, 8th grade, that number will be smaller. But it's getting kids in, getting them adjusted to middle school, making that transition. But in many cases, these 35 kids are suffering from some real, whether it's environmental trauma, whether it's real mental health issues and other things that are happening in their life that are just completely dysregulated.
Do you find that it's the same, are those kids having the same problem from, through all of the years that they're at Longview?
In some cases, but not in all. In many cases, maturity does happen over the course of a 5th to 6th to 7th grade. A lot of the interventions that we'll put in place, whether it's family-based, whether it's counseling, and do, provide some positive results as well. So it's a case-by-case.
Do we find that these are kids that have come through the school system, or kids that maybe be here for a short amount of time and then moving on somewhere else, or percentage-wise?
Yeah, it's a pretty good mix. There are kids that we've had, from pre-K right through, and there are other kids who come in, and reacclimating to a new middle school is always tough. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of behaviors, and then we can work with them, and we can get that down to a comfortable level. Some of it is, some of the group homes that we have around town that tend to, be with us quite frequently. So it's a combination.
So it's kind of common to hear people say, and I'm not saying in this district, but just in general in the state, that they feel like you can't send kids out of your classroom anymore. That your kids are going to be, they're going to have to stay in the class, they're going to be disruptive, they're going to take away from other kids' opportunity to learn.
Yep.
So I guess I'm just kind of wondering how do you gauge how your own teachers feel about that? Do you feel like somebody's got their back if something is just going really wrong?
No, and I think that kind of fluctuates too, and I would like to think that my teachers feel supported. They will come to me and say, we really need some help with this particular child, and we'll do what we need to do. We do want to keep students in class, but not at the expense of educating everybody else. And that's hit or miss. That could be 2 days out of the week. It could be having a really bad week, and we really need to put a plan in. But that's the data that we track pretty consistently. So we find that a 10 or 15-minute launch to a lesson, I get what I need. I can go to the Academic Success Center. I can do that work quietly. I can re-engage back in class. Works really well for some kids. But again, we want to keep them in class. There are some kids that, on certain days, that they just cannot stay in the class, that they're
Yeah,
disrupting
Yeah.
the whole work.
absolutely.
So, may I ask a quick question? I'm sorry. So when the school has to report an ISS for the state?
Yep.
What does that entail? Because, so we're talking about someone saying, oh, I need some ISS. I think, is it the Academic Success Room?
Academic Success Center.
Right, is
Yep,
that
yep.
where we're calling it instead of ISS at the school level?
Well,
two separate?
the Academic Success Center is used totally differently. I
Okay,
mean, for
okay.
kids
So let me not
to,
confuse things then.
Yep.
So if someone admits, like, I want to be an ISS for today or for the next 20 minutes, or whatever that looks like.
Yep.
Do we then have to report that into DESI, or no, is it a full ISS day?
it has to be over, it's going to be more than half the day.
More than half
Yep.
a day? Thank you.
Another question, you mentioned, so it won't be truly comparable because then you'll be moving to online testing after this year, right?
Correct. So next year, all MCAS will be online.
And you guys haven't had a chance to do that at all yet?
We did. We tested Park online, and
Okay.
we tested Park paper and pencil. Then we went to MCAS paper pencil. Now we're going to go to MCAS 2.0 online, which the whole state. So 5th, 7th, and 8th have to test online. 6th grade theoretically could do paper pencil. I've elected to
Okay.
have them all jump in, and we'll do it school-wide online testing.
Oh, wow.
And we did find from Park Online, I mean, there are some technical pieces for the kids to deal with. They're really good with the technology.
Right.
We do a lot of practice with it. We saw that some of their writing was shorter. And again, that was part of the platform that we hope has been fixed. Where if you're typing into a tiny little box and
Right.
what you're typing vanishes, I don't think any of us as professionals could deal with that. I know I can't. So if you're going to edit and revise, then I want to see actually what it looks like. So working within those little text boxes and, yep.
It'd be interesting to see where it goes. Framingham is leading the charge to do away with the online testing. It didn't make it to a resolution, but they have continued to work towards it, so we shall see.
We'll see.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
I do
that's
have-
fine.
I do, just on the model where you're talking about formative, coherent instruction model and student
Yes.
discourse.
Yep.
This is just, I guess, something that I see a lot of and question and wonder what you see. How much feedback do you feel like kids are actually getting? So, they do this assignment, maybe they learned from it, maybe they didn't. Where does the actual one-on-one or feedback model kind of come into play?
Yep, I mean, so that's one of the strategies that we're trying to have teachers use as much as they can, is providing that one-on-one feedback to kids in real time, whether it's on Google Classroom,
Right.
particularly with writing, works out really well. It's time-consuming,
Yeah.
so that's a hard, but it's an important piece. Getting kids to understand and kind of self-assess. So one of the activities that we do is the kids self-assess and say, okay, you can either be in the red group, the yellow group, or the green group. They're flexible groups. So they'll go there and they'll say, okay, I need some help. And so the red group is usually sitting right with the teacher. The yellow group, they can probably work with a peer and then say, okay, now I get it. And then they might transition right to the green group, which is doing more of an extension. So if we can get the kids to self-assess, and the kids tend to be harder on themselves than we are sometimes, and then really provide them with good feedback about where they are. And that's what that thinking tool provides us to do, is what are we doing to check for understanding? How do we know the kids have it, and what do we do? What's our professional move if they're not?
Yeah.
So that's one of the key pieces of that formative piece. It's an assessment of learning, and for learning, not of learning. So
Yeah.
getting the kids to kind of get into that mode is really critical.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig.
Yeah.
Great synopsis of an incredibly complicated work, unbelievable. How do you say this in 20 minutes or less? Thank you. Fran, welcome. I don't know if you're bringing your team. If you do, introduce them.
Yes. met any of them.
Right, I don't know.
Good evening, everyone. I thought I'd take this opportunity to introduce you to the rest of the administrative team. This is Miss Brittany Lavoy. This is her first year, assistant principal. And this is Miss Laura Ramos at SPSA, in charge of SPED. So, one of the things that we did differently this year, because we have had a number of new assistant principals, is where we broke down our discipline, our primary source, because the 8th graders, this would have been their 4th assistant principal in 4 years. I'm handling the 8th grade, because I've known them for 3 years. And Laura's having 5th and 7th, and Laura will have 6th grade. So then next year we'll switch, I'll do 5th, so I can follow them through the 4 years, all right? This data is kind of in 2 parts. One of it was the preliminary data before we got the actual cut scores and the different categories that are new this year. We use that to kind of like, that's our early warning system. So it's based on percentages of points available. So one of the things that we track are subgroups, special ed, and ELLs. So we look at the gap between all students and all students in the state, and then the SPED students and the SPED students in the state, ELL and so forth, and we look for big gaps that are different. So in some cases, the difference between SPED in general is smaller in SPED. In some cases, it's smaller in ELL. When you look at the bottom of any of those pages, if there's an asterisk, that's something where we, something jumped out at us. And that was like our first knowledge. So if you look at, for example, selected populations, we went to ELL grade 7. And we saw that for our SPED students, there were 26 of them. The school only got 34% of the possible points. The district got 43, and the state got 50. Then we looked at a couple of standards below that, knowledge of language, and the split was 37, 54, and 59. And key ideas and details were 31, 46, and 51. Now, at that point, when you're looking at preliminary data, that could only be one question on that particular standard, or it could be 2. But it's something that we said, okay, this is something that we really want to take a look at once we get the actual questions. So since then, we've gotten the real data, so the coaches have gone through and looked at individual students and their scores and the standards and that sort of stuff. But this was kind of like, I wanted to take you through the process that we do. So grade 7 ELA, grade 8 ELA were 2 areas that jumped out at us. The math didn't jump out at us as much compared to the other things in any of the subgroups. We were pretty much right there with the district and the state. And then probably the last page was something that Craig hit up on in this preliminary data, our key indicators. Just our population trends, we do get the ELL newcomers, so our Hispanic population is growing. White students went up briefly. Our attendance improved from 93.8 to 93.9. Chronically absent rate reduced by 2%, almost 22.1 to 20.7, and our suspension rate went down from 8.7 to 8.6%. So that was something that we're pleased with. And then after the key indicators, now we get to the real data comparisons for ELA by grade 5 and 6. The US in there is the Urban Superintendents Network. Okay, so that's the composite of Andre's group. So we're just trying to look at comparison points because, like Craig said, when I looked at the MCAS data year after year, well, the last year that we took MCAS was 2014. So there's no direct correlation. I called the state because their SGP things didn't make sense to me and said, well, how can you give us a growth rating for, say, our 5th graders when they took Park in 3rd and 4th grade and took MCAS here? And they said, well, we have a formula, which doesn't really help me a lot. I know it's the same for everybody, but it's not just a useful comparison for us. So that's why I put things down here with the USN, so you can compare us to the district, to the Urban Superintendents Network, and to the state. So it's much more difficult to meet the exceeding expectations than it was for advanced. Just for example, I looked at the 2014 grade 6 math was an area that we've done particularly well in. In 2014, we had 11% that were in advanced. We had 1% in exceeding expectations this year for MCAS. So there's really not a great deal of useful comparisons for us. What was more useful is then looking at the standards in the areas that we were off compared to the district where there was that big gap. So our coaches' math and ELA coaches have all that data. We meet with our teams once a month as administrators, and the coaches meet with them once a month, then the team leaders meet with them another time a month. We've been very fortunate this year that Jeff Stadolsky, the district science person, has come to meet with our science teachers the same day that the math teachers are meeting with them and the ELA teachers. And then we will meet with the social studies teachers, try to talk about some of the data there and how that can be used constructively in there, because a lot of the writing is now nonfiction text, so they can help us out a great deal with science and with social studies. One big thing that we've done differently, partly due to this data, is we've set up an intervention block, which starts the day. One of our biggest challenges was, how do you get someone help or assistance or enrichment outside of their regular classroom so they're not missing their grade level stuff? So we had a school improvement committee that met last year after school. We changed our schedule, so we start with breakfast, then we start with an intervention block. Like Craig had mentioned, the red, yellow, green, some of our reds, it's social emotional stuff. Some of it is organizational executive functioning group. So like Brittany and Laura have a group that they meet with for executive functioning. What are you missing? What do you need to get through the day? We have the benefit of doing it this way is no teacher is teaching a class. So it's kind of like all hands on deck across the entire school. So those kids who you look at and you say they're squirrely, they need to run around and stuff before they can get going, well, there's a class in gym for them that they can go to. Kids that need like some just social skills, there are teachers that do that. There are guidance people that do that. The guidance people are doing the second steps with the 5th grade classroom every other week. So they go through the team there. And I kind of pick up, like, I don't want to say the leftovers, but the kids that on this day, they're supposed to be here, but they can't really function there, so they're with me and we're doing something different there. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the intervention stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so we've got so much great data that tells us what the kids need, but we were just really struggling with when we were going to fill those gaps. And so we've developed that time, and it's a program in development, because what we're trying to evolve into is to have each teacher work on or intervention group work on specific goals with these kiddos that are based more concretely on their needs, and track them on 6-week intervention cycles using like an RTI model. So these groups are presently they're in flux. So if kids, really needed to catch up in math, but their biggest deficit is, or more long-term deficit is in reading comprehension, we want to make sure that they're not isolated to one deficit, we'll say. But we also need to know that our efforts are fruitful. So the next layer to this is finding data collection in terms of, during this 6 weeks, did what we did with them make a difference? Have they actually gained any skills? We want that to be a consistent model throughout the building, so that we're developing that incrementally. But we're getting into our second cycle. And there's a little bit of movement, but as we predicted, a lot of kids need another round of, the similar skill that they're working on. So for example, the group that I work on they're working on their behavior skills and, appropriate social skills in the classroom, because I'm working with those heavy hitters, frequent office referrals, to see if we can try to get them on track. And what we're finding is that their biggest struggle, a lot of them, is just being so far behind or so unorganized in their current classes that it's easier to, misbehave rather to engage and feel foolish. So they get to start every day making sure that they're on track, have what they need. And they can pop into the other interventions if they said, I have a test today and I've really blown it all week, I got to catch up. So they can go in and check in on those other interventions and have a home base with one of us. So the coaches have been great using the the common assessments, the MCAS data, figuring out what kids need. Now we've got a place and a time for them to get it, and our next step is to just make sure that our efforts are impactful, and we can show that with data.
And you've got some specialized sped reading programs going on.
We
there,
do.
too.
We have, looking at our SPED population and the needs of those particular students, we have interventions targeted towards specific needs based off of our data and our special ed needs within the classroom. So we have specific reading groups going, we have targeted math instruction going on, some written comprehension, written language stuff. So we have a lot of good targeted interventions for these kids. And I think what we wanted to do was make it purposeful for the teachers and for the students. So it's not based off of teachers' needs, what are the students' needs? And that's coming together as a team and talking about that amongst the grade level. So they've done a really good job with looking at the kiddos that they have in front of them and identifying this is what we need to do and these are what these students really need. And then tracking the progress for each of those students.
Probably our biggest scheduling concern now is because everybody's involved. We're involved, the specialists are involved, is there are some enrichment-based activities that are offered at this time, like chorus, for example. And so if we have kids who just have this, huge deficit in reading, we want them to be able to learn that, but we also want them to be able to have these
Opportunities to be in
experiences.
chorus,
So we're
yeah.
trying to juggle.
Punishment.
Exactly.
Right.
So if
So
some
what-
kids are going to course and some kids are going to the gym and you're going to math every day, it feels crummy. So we're trying to find a way to balance that.
45 minutes. So what we're trying to do is we talked to Mr. Desadi, we talked to people there, so if they have a concert coming up, say, okay, so we need to get these kids ready for that concert. So for these next couple of weeks, at least, they're gonna go to chorus every day. We'll try to fix it some other way.
The other
We don't wanna make it so that only straight A kids can participate in these extracurricular things like that, for sure. But to Craig's point earlier, this is also strengthening our relationships with kids, because it's given us a chance to some of the things that are more soft skills than strictly academic. So that some kids just need to get settled before they're ready to attack, a school day. So we talk to them quite frequently, about so does it kind of feel like you have two math classes and you don't really like math, or do you feel like you're getting some help here? Some kids are doing 10 marks online stuff. It's self-paced. Some kids like working in a smaller group. Some of the kids at Brittany's work, they don't even go to her office anymore. They just come in with work. They're sitting at a table that they don't even actually need her anymore, which is what we're trying to get them to that point so that the next cycle they won't.
To return to their
They
regular
can go
interventions
back.
been
So
great.
the tracking of the data, making it meaningful, in terms of grade-wise and stuff like that, are things that we're working on.
Yeah.
But overall, in talking to the kids, they like the new schedule. It's enabled us to have a 5-day rotating schedule instead of 4. It lets the lunch block rotate, so the kids, before we had a double E, so if you had E, you had that same period every single day. So this way it flows, so it gives them more change, and it just gives them, like I say, it gives them a breather. And, some teachers have been experimenting with a lot of things. Mr. Landry will take his kids outside to the
doing a
field
lot
room
of
back
culture
there, a lot of
building.
times like that. There's just a lot of, it's giving some of our upper grades, if you will, that weren't as, I don't want to say sold, but weren't as practiced on things like the responsive classroom. This has given them time to be able to do that without feeling like, oh, it's taken away from my science class if I do, the circle in the morning, something like this. And it's given our teachers gallery walk stuff, teachers saying, hey, if anyone needs any ideas of how to do this, I have this great thing. So we've had teachers that have done developmental designs, they sent out the link to everybody. We've done some sampling, we've had teachers double up. So at the beginning, 5th grade is very different from 8th grade, so they're getting used to middle school. So a lot of their activities are gonna be around socialization, getting organized, that sort of stuff, before they hit the heavy. We also have less data on them because it's their first year with us. So we've doubled up some teachers down there so that the kids feel like, oh, there's another adult in my wing that I get to know. We visit during a lot of the intervention groups. Today I spent time in 2 classrooms downstairs in 5th grade, just to try to get the kids Here's another adult that cares about me, someone that I can go to, that sort of stuff, you know, all the time. So it's really been beneficial. We're gonna iron out some glitches, like I say, we want it to be more like, for a
Systematic,
manufacturing term, like a just-in-time type of thing. But that's not always possible. You know, a kid may need help for a test that he has on Friday, but doesn't need intervention any other than that, because they've been out 2 or 3 days, or something else happened. So how can we get those kids caught up without taking away time from class? Because that's always been the conundrum for us is, how do you help kids remediate stuff without them missing the grade level stuff, having access to that curriculum that they need? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
7-period day?
no, we have 6, yeah. So we have the intervention block, that goes right after breakfast. So we start our day at 8:30. It goes from 7:30 to 7:45 for breakfast, and then 7:45 to 8:30. And then we start in, our blocks. We were still able to get them to 58-minute blocks.
Yeah, 3 major impacts that it's had so far, at least, is first, our students. We have, you know, some kids who are school phobic, chronically absent, etc., and they know that they have 45 minutes at the beginning of the day reserved to get out of the way whatever is, you know, keeping them anxious from attending school, making up work from past absences, etc., etc. A lot of the times, behavior plans for some of our students who are frequently referred to the office are difficult to utilize with Fidelity because we can't find time in the day for the incentive in the incentive plan. And so now we have time built into the day that those needs are met, and also that you can preview changes for students who are, you know, anxious in transitions, et cetera. It's a really good, everybody gets settled before the day starts. And then each team has reserved 1 day, if, you know, ongoing as needed, to do those one-on-one conferencing meetings with students, and to eventually go over those directed goals and their data, so students are not only aware of their challenges and their goals, but following the data, because kids get much more involved and invested in their progress when they can watch it themselves and feel like they can track it.
No, we do the scheduling. Yeah.
So what happens, the coaches go through the raw data, and, you know, can bucket kids using the red, yellow, and green, and then input from the teachers for, you know, I know that this says that this kiddo is doing so poorly in reading comprehension and needs this intervention, but it's really the ability to regulate themselves prior. So we met with all of the teams and talked about exceptions to the rule, or you know, what the data isn't telling us with some of these kids, to make sure that they ended up in the right bucket first. But you know, so we're able to check a lot of boxes with this block. I mean, we definitely have a lot of fine tuning to do, but it's provided the time and the opportunity to make some impactful changes.
And it looks very different in grade 5 at the starting than what it does in grade 8, when students are kind of like, I want to get into the honors academy, or I want to get into STEM academy, and how can you help me with this sort of stuff? Whereas 5th graders were like, okay, so what does bullying look like in middle school? What should you do when this sort of stuff happens? You know, just different scenarios and things like that. So there's a lot of getting used to changing teachers, and now social studies is a separate class, science is a separate class, as opposed to, you know, the way it is in elementary school. So there's a lot for them to get used to. But it's something, you know, that overall has been very positive, but it's something that we're going to continue to work at. And what we found is, when we track our discipline data, things that we hoped would happen are happening. So a lot of the discipline stuff that was happening in September isn't happening now, because the relationships have been built, and the kids are starting to trust us a little bit more, and they're in a lot of things, like Craig was saying, like Brittany was saying, we have kids that come up and, you know, they're sent from a class and whatever, and they're sitting there, and you talk to them a little bit, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to go back to class. Call the teacher, and they're back in class, and they do that successfully. It doesn't always work like that, but that it just gives us another avenue to build relationships with kids, you know. So that's our big change for this year. The red, yellow, green, that's district-wide, that fit nicely under our UDL stuff that we've been working with for the past couple of years, so it's really nothing new. We're able to present that to the teachers as not another brick to put in your backpack, but just an expansion of stuff that you've already been doing. So we're really happy with where we are right now. Obviously, anytime you look at data, wherever they cut the score, there's always room for improvement, you know, and we will continue to work at that. But I think, you know, I know everybody here preaching, you know, to the choir that there are more things that kids get out of school than a raw test score. So I think that, you know, we're working really hard to get kids, you know, from where they are to where they want to be and to get them invested in their own education. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna sound a little bit like a broken record here, but do you feel like you have a pulse on your classroom teachers and whether they feel like classroom management is, you know, something they're gonna get support from if they're gonna send a kid out, or they need to kind of control the environment?
Yeah, I think, you know, our message has always been like, if there's someone that's taking away the rights of other kids to learn, then we certainly want you to send them out. Once they send them out, there will be times when there are disagreements with what we do with those kids when we're here. The key to that is communication. In some cases, there are times when I'm like, okay, this kid needs to go out of here for a couple of days, and the teacher will say, no, he's worried. Can you put him in in-house, or can you hold him there for something like, I don't want you to drop the hammer on him or her, but they just couldn't do that right then. So we're piloting a new disciplinary system through Google Sheets, which is very similar to X2. It just gives us more meaningful data quicker, so we can track what happened when. At the beginning of the year, when, interesting, the 8th graders were getting a lot of referrals right after lunch. Okay? That was the
Don't they
most
have a
common
really
time.
late lunch?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're trying to figure,
They
so.
hold on the best they can.
Yeah, so it's
yeah.
kind of like, so to teachers, how we getting the kids from the cafeteria, or what's going on at lunch,
Yeah.
that sort of stuff, that leads that to that. So is it happening in all classes, is it happening in a few? And then we're looking at individual students, and like Craig and like every other school, there's gonna be a certain subset of kids that are responsible for the most, you know, disciplinary issues that we're working with. But we certainly do not suspend kids that deserve to be suspended because we're worried about,
The state.
you know, any sort of oversight or anything. Like Andre has been very clear to us, like, if you need to do that to make your school safe, that's what we do. But that's a last resort.
Yeah, I mean, and like Mr. T was saying, I'm number 4 in 4 years, and so there was some trust to be built between myself and the teachers, and so I did a lot of groundwork when I got here, ensuring them that my door's open and there is open dialogue, that I would much rather have them call me and say, you really duffed it with this kiddo, it should have looked like this, and, you know, this was what it was like in the moment, rather than feel like there's stifled voices. But something that, you know, I'm happy to report is Mr. Thomas is right, that, you know, teachers are really honest that, you know, I wanted this to be documented for just in case purposes, but, you know, this kiddo needs to be in school. We have, you know, much like Longjo, we've got a really, really excellent person in our academic success center and in our in-house room that are really willing to work with kids to just help them reset if that's what they need. So they may need some time out of the classroom, but does it need to be time spent at home not learning?
Right.
Sometimes that one classroom where the student's having problems, it's in the morning. He doesn't need to be in the in-house all day.
Right.
Right.
When he's doing very well in the other classes.
Yeah.
You know, so.
There are some classes who will say, you know what, you take a timeout for 2 or 3 days. You get your work and come to my office, sit with us, or we're gonna go there. And in some cases, we've mediated with the teacher and the kid to say, you know what, there's 2 ways of looking at this. You're looking at it this way, but the teacher has 27 other kids besides you, and this is this. And again, that conversation is different across that 5 through 8 spectrum. And the more the kids get to know us and trust us. So me talking to an 8th grader is different from Brittany talking to a 5th grader that's been in school for 2 months, or someone that I've known for 3.5 years.
And we're piloting some, and we're at the really beginning stages of it, but restorative justice. You know, how can you give back to the community that you've taken away from, and kind of what lessons have you learned from that? We're looking at it more from a morality and citizenship perspective, but it's something that's relatively new to all of us. So we're dipping our toes in because I think there could be a lot of success there. Yeah, it's a no, well, it's a disciplinary practice where you talk to kids about their impact on the community. So It's not scary.
You help them make amends
I
for what they
promise.
did. You'd like it.
It's a logical consequence, like you,
I know something about it.
but you damage the community, and that trying to get the kids to understand, like, what the impact their action can, and then how to repair that, because in some cases, we've talked to kids who have cut class or done something like this, and I'm like, so you need to understand, the next time that you wanna go to the bathroom, you wanna do this, teacher may say, you gotta sign in, you gotta do this, you gotta be back by, like, you've gotta restore that trust. You know, it doesn't happen overnight.
It could be as simple as, if you leave your lunch tray on your table every single day, maybe me and you wash that table together after lunch so we can be a part of fixing the problem.
I think it's taking ownership as well, like them knowing that it was wrong and then them owning it to say, okay, now what can I do differently? And I think that's what a lot of them are learning from some of the things that Ms. Lavoie and I are working on with them in our interventions, and discipline-wise when they're in my office.
Thank you.
All right.
Team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some great donations again. The first one is donation of in-kind, and that is towards, those are the field trips to the Museum of Science, and that is like scholarship from that. The second one is, I'm still in contact with Dr. Antonucci, and in a conversation about a month ago, he said, I got this grant that, you might want to apply for $5,000, and send me a letter that, you'd like to have a grant for $5,000 for technology. So I sent him a letter, and we received a check for $5,000. And the tech department is going to use it to buy another set of virtual goggles.
We still love Bob, don't we?
You got to try those out. So we're purchasing another set of those. And then the last donation is that ongoing royalty that we received from Pearson. I think we're on year 5 or 6 now. And it's another $900 to go in the coffers from a royalty from a product that some of our teachers under the direction of Bonnie Bear CMAC designed. So that's a good thing.
So we want to take these, bundle them together?
Let's bundle them.
Action items 17-937 and up through and including 17-943.
Make a motion, we approve.
Motion made to approve. Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is unanimous. Thank you. No need for executive session. Have a motion to adjourn? Motion made to adjourn. Do I hear a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, the vote.
No, remind everyone.
Remind
The
everyone.
vote, oh, the vote tomorrow. Oh, yeah. Is there an election tomorrow? Oh, okay. Kidding, okay. Yes, everyone at home, vote. 7 o'clock, polls open. So you get there bright and early.
Good luck
8
to
p.m.
everybody.
Good luck.
who's-
Till 8
Good luck
p.m.,
to
that's
everybody
right.
who's running for office.
Yeah.
That's right. So all in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
All opposed? It is unanimous. We're adjourned.
Want to sign the warrant?